The Coneheads first appeared on Saturday Night Live on the 11th episode of the second season, hosted by Ralph Nader. In that skit titled The Coneheads at Home, which I sadly can't play here unless I wanted the video blocked, we meet a family of conical-skulled aliens, husband and wife Beldar and Primet and their earthborn daughter Connie. And in that sketch, the parents are forced to tell their child of their real origins after hearing that she's not fitting in at school and the cover of Being from France is no longer able to convince.
I was sitting with Danny in his SNL dressing room waiting for the next scene to be camera blocked. It was late November 1976. Davis, let's go somewhere for the break. Where would you like to be for Christmas? Easter Island and San Francisco for New Year's. All right, you research it. Make sure your passport hasn't expired. We're going. The next few days were spent exploring. As we crossed an overgrown field, I literally stumbled over the nose on a giant stone face. There was a quarry where some of the huge statues, or moai, were unfinished and had yet to be removed from their volcanic beds. I had brought along a paperback copy of Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End, a wonderful science fiction novel in which alien spacecraft eclipse the sun and hover over major cities and save mankind from itself. I finished the book and handed it to Dan, who read it in one sitting. I had some acid, and we wandered into the most remote place on the island and got lost. We sat down in the shade. Danny was cracking me up all day by grabbing his head and loudly moaning, "The heads! The heads!" We would write the Coneheads on the first show when we got back.
That was an excerpt from the Saturday Night Live writer Tom Davis's autobiography called 39 Years of Short-Term Memory Loss. It's a really very good book if you're interested in the behind the scenes of Saturday Night Live. That first outing with the alien family proved to be such a hit for the show that it was subsequently revived 10 more times, with hosts Jack Burns, Elliot Gould, Buck Henry, Charles Grodin, Jill Clayburgh, Richard Dreyfuss, Frank Zappa, Kate Jackson, and twice with Steve Martin, all using pretty much the same comedy formula, which is to say the deadpan underplaying of an obvious physical difference which remains hidden despite being in plain sight. The sketches came to their logical conclusion when Dan Aykroyd left the show in '79 with John Belushi so they could make the Blues Brothers movie. But that was not the end of the Coneheads.
You are to speed your way to a remote solar system on the frontier and seize a tiny planet inhabited by inferior beings who call themselves humans.
The first adaptation came in 1983, a surprisingly well-drawn but poorly animated Rankin Bass special. The entire original cast returned to reprise their roles for a 25-minute special episode written by Al Franken and the original writer Tom Davis, in what was meant to be a springboard for a new series, which never came.
I will open the plague door manually.
Once we have established a base of operations, we will construct a monotron crystal to inform Remulac of our situation.
Yes, a rescue.
Yes.
The plot retells the Conehead origin story, as it was told in that first sketch. Beldar and Primat crash land on Earth and are forced to take a job in a repair shop so they can harvest the parts needed to contact their home planet, Remulac. Primat announces that she's pregnant and Julie gives birth to a baby girl, which they name Connie. Fast forward to Connie being a teenager and far more familiar with Earth customs rather than the ways of the Conehead home planet, much to her father's dismay. She goes on a date with a man called Ronnie, and Beldar gets a call from the president of Remulac, in which they're told that the rescue mission isn't coming anytime soon.
The kids at school know that I am different from them. They want to know where I come from. Daddy, where do we come from?
France.
Time has dated this animation badly. The characters jerk across the screen rather than moving in that fluid way that we're used to in the 21st century. The Flintstone-style laugh track also shows this for what it is. A relic. I have no idea how it went down at the time, but the fact that this was the only episode leads me to think it wasn't well received. It was released on VHS in the UK, which is where I first saw it, but the whole show's on YouTube now if you want to see it.
They have come from the cold, far reaches of space. Roger, TACOM.
Unidentified aircraft.
To conquer our world.
Request permission to fire.
And to enslave our people forevermore.
He's disappeared.
That is, until the Balthark hit the spinning Crinor.
A full 10 years later, a big screen adaptation was made, starring Dan Aykroyd and Jane Curtin again, but Laraine Newman taking a smaller role as she'd aged out of playing the daughter. That role was taken by Michelle Burke. The plot retells the Coneheads' origin story, as it was told in that first sketch. Beldar and Primet crash land on Earth, and Beldar is forced to take a job in a repair shop so he can harvest the parts needed to contact their home planet, Remulakian. Primet announces that she's pregnant and Julie gives birth to a baby girl, which they name Connie. Fast forward to Connie being a teenager and far more familiar with Earth's customs rather than the ways of the Conehead home planet, much to her father's dismay. She goes on a date with a man called Ronnie, and Beldar gets a call from the president of Remulakian, in which he's told that the rescue mission has come for them and they must return back home.
Here's the man that made it happen last match.
This film hits the ground running. Within 5 minutes of the film starting, the lead character's spaceship has crashed and they're looking for shelter. The very next scene, Beldar is working in a repair shop. He's not looking for work, he's not having an interview. Boom, he's in there and he's working hard and he's already on good terms with the boss. 8 minutes in and they're contacting their home planet. 10 minutes in and Primet is pregnant. 20 minutes in, Beldar has a new job and a new boss. 25 minutes in, Primet is giving birth. With an hour and a half runtime, that means we're 1/3 of the way through the movie and we've covered more plot than most TV shows cover in a whole season. It's an economy of storytelling that Peter Jackson could learn a lot from.
I'm going on an adventure!
Though it is a shame to have split up the original trio, I really like what they've done with the Connie character. She's much more like a second-generation immigrant. She doesn't have the trademark speech patterns that her parents have. She's also far less confused by the ways of a world that she's been brought up in rather than adopted.
Wow! My mom's the only other woman I've ever known who could take a sandwich like that.
The cast list is a Hall of Fame of Saturday Night Live stars. Dan Aykroyd, Jane Curtin and Laraine Newman are all from the original cast, as is Garrett Morris, who rears his pointy head for a single scene. John Lovitz had left the show in 1992. David Spade, Chris Farley, Adam Sandler, Jan Hooks and Tim Meadows were all cast members while the film was being shot. There was even one future cast member in Michael McKean, who would join the show in the following year.
Why am I the only one who can see the problem?
Almost every scene ends up being a cameo, and it can distract from the story. But that being said, every face was a welcome addition when they popped up on the screen. The film is shot in this bright, colourful way which seems to scream, "It's the 90s!" in every shot. The production design of the Conehead home planet is rather nice, the organic dome structure mimicking the shape of the residents' craniums. And look at the monster. That's proper old school stop motion right there. That gives the beast a weight I don't believe you could have achieved with CGI at the time. So what did the critics think?
I imagine that the idea of making the Conehead sketches into a movie was inspired by the success of Wayne's World, another transplant from comedy TV. But the Coneheads don't wear well at feature length. The screenplay seems contrived, the humor is forced, and the Coneheads basically exist in a one-joke universe. Take away their heads, and what do you have left?
Well, you have a few lines of smart dialogue by Dan Aykroyd, you know, parental units, that high-tech speech, which is cute.
Yeah.
But you're right, there is no arc to this story. Wayne's World took these guys out of the basement and gave them a whole wacky universe to play in.
Yes, there was something for us to care about. We really wanted them to succeed and to get out of their grungy little cable television world. And here, the Coneheads seem to exist exactly at the same level from beginning to end.
I'll tell you what, they're never really in jeopardy. You know, Wayne's World, the whole world could come crashing down. They had goals and dreams. The Coneheads just want to pass.
Yeah.
And in the 5-minute bit, that was okay to sustain them.
Of course,
but it doesn't work in this way. You're absolutely right.
While there is some truth in that, I think it's a little harsh. Let's hear what Tom Davis has to say.
My first feelings of trepidation came when Lorne hired a director who had done only children's movies. Lorne started talking about crossover audiences, something about how our original SNL fans were now having children, so he wanted to make a movie that wasn't too scary. Then he hired Bonnie and Terry Turner to help Danny and me with the rewrite. However, their sensibilities were not compatible with mine. I approached Lorne in his lair overlooking the SNL studio. Lorne, Coneheads is about sex and violence, and nobody knows more about the Cones than I do. No, Tom, nobody knows more about the Coneheads TV sketch than you do. Back on the other coast, I discovered the script had been rewritten so that the scenes on their home planet, Remulakian, had been reduced to a big gladiatorial event in a stadium. I had written in restaurants, streets, and homes. Then I saw the Cones. They had been reduced because they didn't fit in the frame. That was always the big joke. The heads, the heads. This is why the first rule in Hollywood is get rid of the writer. My part, the dentist, went to John Lovitz, who was wonderful, but that was supposed to be my big acting break. On opening weekends, the Hollywood numbers guys always know by 7 p.m. on Friday whether or not a movie is a success. Coneheads was a disaster.
Siskel and Ebert do make a good point about there being no story arc. In the cartoon, the Coneheads were coming to Earth for a hostile takeover. In this version, that detail is omitted. When they're forced to stay on the planet and wait for rescue, they integrate with ease. If anything, they excel in their surroundings. If they hated the planet, whilst their daughter loves it, their choice to stay at the end would be a more satisfying character change. The director picked for the production was Steve Barron, who made his name helming Family Pictures, which might have made him an unusual choice for most Conehead fans, but when you consider he was hot off the success of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, which was the highest grossing independent film of all time, he might not sound like quite the outsider. The Bonnie and Terry Turner, who Tom Davis said rewrote the script in that audiobook excerpt, are the husband and wife writing duo who were riding high on the success of Wayne's World, which they co-wrote with Mike Myers. Years after Coneheads, they created the sitcom Third Rock from the Sun, about an alien family living covertly in suburbia, also starring Jane Curtin. I think it's safe to assume that it's the combination of these three creatives that pushed the production in the family-friendly direction that the producer, Lorne Michaels, wanted. And the PG tone may have come as a disappointment to any fans eagerly waiting for this film's release. But I don't think it's the film's major problem. Every single scene is a little comedy skit, which might amuse, but doesn't really push the story forwards. After a while, I found myself longing for a straight man to counter the zany antics.
Look, we're gonna work this out.
I think the best character to fit that role would be Beldar's first boss, Otto, played by Sinbad. He gets the Conehead family their false identity and then disappears from the story. But if he'd stayed alongside the family, perhaps he was exploiting their alien skills, and it could have been his idea to say that they're from France. And then at the end of the second act, when Beldar and his family return home, he suddenly realises how they've grown to be friends and he's actually going to miss them. One thing that is rather confusing is this montage sequence after the birth of Connie. We are regaled by a catchy Paul Simon number and we see what I assume to be about 17 Earth years worth of Connie growing up. But despite the time elapsed, no one looks any older. Sure, I would understand why the parental units would look the same, they are aliens after all. But what about David Spade and Michael McKean? It looks like no time's passed for them either. Was it too much to grey up their hair and stick them in a couple of fat suits? The obvious way out of this little plot hole is to say that Conehead's adolescence is accelerated, and the aged equivalent of 17 years in a matter of months. But if that's the case, why did we see 17 years pass in the montage?
What have you done to your cone?
Nothing.
I can only assume that this issue has arisen because something's been added or removed or moved around during the editing, as I doubt such a thing would have passed by unnoted in the script. Dan Aykroyd is something of a childhood hero of mine. He's the first actor whose real name I learnt. I remember watching a promotional behind-the-scenes documentary around the time that Ghostbusters 2 came out, and in it mentioned that he and Harold Ramis wrote the script. And I thought, oh well, that's what stars do, they write the movies they're in. If only that was the real case. But I think that's when I really got interested in writing. And Dan Aykroyd is an underrated screenwriter. So many of his films are filled with hilarious, quotable lines.
It's 106 miles to Chicago. We got a full tank of gas,
half a pack of cigarettes, it's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
We mock what we don't understand.
Yeah.
Miss Borden's sewage breath would be your little nickname for...
Muzz. M.O. Muzz.
Not much of an improvement.
Okay, I hereby find all parties culpable in these matters as charged, and so choose to invade the maximum levy for these violations, and do therefore deem that you be conveyed to a holy, awful place of execution, wherein you shall be put to death.
Are you a god?
No.
Then...
And even as Siskel and Ebert noted, this film has its share of zingers. Like this scene in which Beldar asked to have 55 words with his daughter's date.
Ronnie, may I have 55 words with you? The frightening statistics of young earthlings mangling themselves in internal combustion vehicles on the night of prom ritual makes me insist that you use maximum safety awareness, return at the predesignated time coordinates, and, in fact, take my car. Its reinforced alloy superstructure is far superior to that of your broken-down, rusted-out shitbox.
Perhaps I'm being lenient on this film because of my fondness for the cast and its stars, and possibly because I was 12 when it was released, exactly the demographic it was aimed at. I can see its massive pointy flaws, but I enjoy it anyway. It's freely available should you wish to see it. I believe it's very popular in France.
France. We come from France.
I'm Scott Kingsnorth, and I'm making a movie.